In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up button tracking in Google Tag Manager. Basically what this means is whenever somebody clicks a button on your website or landing page, you'll be able to push that information, that event, into Google Analytics, or you can push it into Facebook ads or Google ads so that you can use that as a conversion event. So I'm inside of my Google Tag Manager account. If you're not familiar with Google Tag Manager, I created a bit of a detailed tutorial on how to get started. You can click the either card above, or there's a link in the description below. So once you have that set up and installed onto your website or your landing page, we can get started with setting up this button tracking event. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have installed either Analytics or Facebook Pixel or whatever platform you want to push this button event tracking into. So if you're using this button click as a conversion event, you're going to want to make sure you have the Facebook Pixel installed. So to do that, you want to click on Tags and then New. Name this Facebook Pixel, click on Tag Configuration, scroll down to Custom HTML. You're going to paste your Facebook Pixel code into this HTML box, click on Triggering, and then All Pages. So what this means is that on every single page, it's going to fire, and when that happens, the Facebook Pixel code is going to fire as well. So that means that basically your Facebook Pixel is installed and firing on every single page so that it can track performance and behavior on every single page. If you're just pushing this information into Google Analytics so that you can just report on the button clicks inside of your events in there, then you need to click on New, name this Google Analytics, click on Tag Configuration, and then we're going to click on GA4 configuration. So this is Google Analytics 4, the new version of Google Analytics. You want to make sure that you have your Google Analytics account set up already and created. From here, you're going to paste in your measurement ID. So that's going to be found in the settings, in your admin settings, in your Google Analytics account. And then click on Triggering. And the same thing, we're going to click on All Pages and then Save. So same thing, whenever anybody visits any page on your website, it's going to fire that Google Analytics tracking code. Okay, so now that we have our tracking code installed, we can set up our button event. Okay, so we're going to go to Triggers, click on New, and what we're going to do is set up a trigger to fire when somebody clicks on a specific button on our website. So I'm going to name this button, and then if I open up my website real quick, we're just going to fire whenever somebody clicks onto this button on my homepage, which is an email opt-in for my email list. So I'm going to name this button email opt-in. We're going to click on Trigger Configuration. And so what we're going to do now is select the variables that we want to fire, which basically defines this specific button click. So variables allow us to collect information about the different elements on our page. So each one of these elements contains specific variable data. I'll show you this in more detail in a moment, and it will probably make a bit more sense. But basically, there's a bunch of different variables on our website, and whenever we click onto any element, not even just a button, but like this piece of text, this piece of open space, or even if we just scroll down to a certain depth, each one of those actions or interactions with this website is going to add a different piece of information for all of those variables. And so what we want to do is understand and define which variables are unique to when people click on this button, and we're going to use that to fire this trigger. So we have a few different categories. Page view, so it doesn't make sense when somebody simply visits a page that we want to fire this. We want this to fire when somebody clicks onto a button in this case. So if you go to the click category, we see we have all clicks and just links. And so real quick, if you don't see those in your Tag Manager account, you need to go to Variables first, go to Configure, scroll down and make sure that you have all of these click elements enabled. I think by default the click elements are unchecked, so you want to make sure that these are checked so that you can actually use and measure these variables when creating your triggers and tags. I would also recommend that you check the forms, the videos, if you install or embed YouTube videos on your pages, and then these scrolling variables as well. We're going to go back to triggers. I'm going to create that trigger again. And we're going to select all elements. So right now this is a variable that is fired whenever somebody clicks on our web page. So it doesn't have to be just on the button, it could be anywhere. Whenever somebody clicks any element, that's going to fire this trigger. So that's not what we want. We only want this to fire when people click just this button. So we're going to say some clicks, and now we have the ability to select a specific variable that is unique to that button click. And if you're not entirely sure which variable is unique to this button, then I'll show you a way to determine that. But just looking at this, I can see that the text of this button is join breadcrumbs newsletter. There's nowhere else on this page that has that exact string of text. And so I'm going to use that to begin with as the variable. So the click, I'm going to select click text contains join breadcrumbs newsletter. And so what this is saying is that whenever somebody clicks on any element and the click text of that element that they clicked on contains join breadcrumbs newsletter, this trigger is going to fire. Next, we're going to set up a tag. And so the tag is how we're going to push information into either Facebook or Google Analytics. So I'm going to send this to Google Analytics in this case. So I'm going to click on new. We're going to name this. Again, this is a button click for email opt-in. I might name this Google Analytics event, just so I understand what exactly or where exactly this is pushing information to. I'm going to click on tag configuration. In this case, we're going to select Google Analytics GA4 event. I need to select the Google Analytics container that I've installed. In this case, it's just named GA. And then we need to name the event. So this is the name that's going to show up inside your Google Analytics account. If I hop into my Analytics account real quick, this is what Google Analytics 4 looks like. If I go into the engagement tab and then click onto events, that's going to open up a page that looks like this. And you can see there's already a bunch of default events that Google Analytics is pulling in for us. And those are page views, engagement, session start, scroll. So you'll probably see these in your site. We're going to create another one that's going to show up among this list here that's called whatever we put into this field. So I'm just going to call it button email opt-in. So that's the string of text that's going to show up in our events list here. Next, we're going to go down to triggering and then select that button trigger that we just set up. And so what this means is that when somebody clicks a button where the click text is join breadcrumbs newsletter, then fire this tag, and that tag is create an event in our Google Analytics account named button email opt-in. So we're going to press save, and you can see at the moment we have 3 workspace changes. These have not been published live to our site. So if you just exit out of Tag Manager at this point, then that event is not going to be pushed into your Analytics account. You actually need to press submit. But before we do that, we can actually go in and preview it and test it to make sure that it's set up correctly. So I'm going to click on preview, and this is going to open up our tag assistant or our preview or debug tool. I'm going to type in the URL of where that button lives on my site. So it's just the primary domain, which is already in there. I'm going to click start. So this is going to, first of all, open up this tag assistant in a new tab. You can see it's trying to connect to that URL that we just put in, and then also opens a new tab in debug mode. So on the bottom right, we can see now that the debugger is connected. We can see this little diamond. And then if we go back to the tag assistant tab, we can see it's being connected, and we can see that matching diamond here as well. We also have 3 events that have already been fired on our web page. So these are the default events that will automatically fire when your page loads. So this is just the, kind of the basic infrastructure of your web page. So the container, the DOM, and then the window. Now, if we go back to that site, and let's say I scroll down here and I just click onto this subheader here, and then I go back to my tag assistant, you'll see that we now have another event that's being logged in our tag assistant. So if I click onto this, we get some information about that specific click that I just made. So first of all, we can see that there are no tags were fired. That makes sense because none of the conditions of the triggers that we have set up in our tag manager account were triggered when I clicked on that subheader. If I go into variables, I can see all of the variables for that specific click, that element that I clicked on. So this is where if you don't know what exactly what variable is unique to the event that you're trying to set up, you can just enter your tag assistant, your preview mode, click onto whatever element you're trying to track, click onto that in the log here, and then click on variables, and then you'll be able to see a list of all the variables as well as the value that was pulled in for that specific click. So if we scroll to the bottom, we can see we have a bunch of video variables which we enabled, which I told you to enable, but you can see that they're undefined, meaning that no information was collected when we clicked on that subheader on the page, right? Which makes sense because it's not a video element, so there's no video variables that would be fired when we click onto that. Same as the scroll depth variables. But we can see that there is some other information that we can look at. For example, the page URL is this, so that's just the URL of the page that that element exists on. We see that the click text is top article, so that was the text of that subheader that I clicked on. So in that case, if we wanted to, for some reason, track when people clicked onto this subheader, we could set a condition in our trigger to say when the click text contains top articles. And then that would fire only when people click onto that subheader, but that wouldn't be very logical. That wouldn't make sense in this case. We wouldn't want to create event for when people click onto that. Now, if I go back and I click onto the button now, and then I go back to our tag assistant, you can see that we've created a 5th event. If I click onto that, and then I click onto the tags tab, we can now see that this tag successfully fired. The GA event button email opt-in. So if I click onto this now, we can see this is information about the tag that we fired. So this is pushing information into Google Analytics as an event. We can see that it succeeded. This is its name, and then this is the container ID for our Google Analytics account. And then these are the firing conditions that we had set up for our trigger. So this is the name of that trigger. The trigger event was a click element. So that's what this is saying right here. When the basically any click happens, and the click text contains join breadcrumbs newsletter. So that's the text contained inside of our button here. So because both of those conditions were met, that trigger was successfully fired, which therefore caused this tag to fire as well. And so what that would do, if this container was published, it would send that information into our Google Analytics account, and we could start measuring that when people visit our site. Now, if I go back to that previous click when I clicked on that subheader, you can see that that event was not fired, but if I click into it, we can see why. So this condition was met because we clicked onto the page. It's a click element, but we can see here that this did not fire because the click text in this case did not contain join breadcrumbs newsletter. And again, if we go to the variables, we can see what the click text was. In this case, it was top articles. So this is how you can kind of diagnose whether or not your tags and triggers are set up correctly. And also, if you don't know how to set them up, this kind of gives you some information on how you could go about doing that. Okay, so that's one way that you could set up a button in Google Tag Manager. Now, in some cases, or in this case, we're lucky because the button itself has a string of text in it. Now, there might be a case where this is actually an image and it's not actually a button element with text inside of it, in which case it wouldn't have any click text. So what could we do to fire this button in that case? Well, what I would do here is I'm going to right click. I'm going to say inspect. I'm in Google Chrome, so I can inspect and look at the HTML and CSS on this page. And so because I right clicked and inspected on that button element, it's going to bring us automatically to that point on the page. And we can see that the HTML for this button is as follows, right? We got button, the type is submit, and then I'm looking at this right here. The class for this button is primary. So that could be something that we can actually use as a condition for a trigger. So if I go back to that click, this is the click when we clicked on the button, and I go to variables, we can see that we have this variable named click classes, and the value is primary. So that's exactly what we're looking at here. It's just a piece of HTML that defines the class for this element to be primary. So as long as this class is unique to this button, and as long as, like, let's say for example this subheader here, as long as the class for this was not also primary, as long as it was unique to this button, then we could use that as a condition to trigger this button click instead of using the click text as we are currently doing. And so if I go back into Tag Manager, I'm going to go to the triggers. I'm going to go to that button trigger we have set up. I'm going to click onto this, and I'm going to change click text to click classes contains primary. And then I'm going to click save. So I'm going to close out the website and the tag assistant, and then I'm going to click on preview again and reopen it and refresh it. So I'm going to click onto that button again, go back to our tag assistant. I'm going to click on that click that was just fired. We can see that now that tag was fired. So if we open up and look at it, we can see that now one of the conditions that was met was click classes contains primary. Now if I scroll down and I click on something else that's not the button, and then I click on click, you can see that tag was not fired. If I click into it, we can see here that that click class does not contain primary, and that's the reason it didn't fire this tag, because it didn't meet that condition. So I hope that was helpful. A few different ways to track your button clicks inside of your website or landing pages using Google Tag Manager. If you're interested in learning more about Google Tag Manager, I've got links in the description below to a playlist with all of my Google Tag Manager tutorials, so make sure you check that out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.